"You're nothing," my husband said at dinner, until my sister pulled my panties from his car. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're nothing." I froze. No one defended me. Until my sister stood up, walked outside, and came back holding something. Something that changed the room instantly, and for the first time, he had nothing to say. If this story helps you understand that cruelty creates conditions for its own exposure, please like and subscribe. There are moments when public humiliation becomes catalyst for public revelation. When someone's cruelty toward you creates exactly the circumstances where their own secrets get exposed in ways that make their mockery backfire completely, when being called nothing in front of family witnesses becomes prelude to discovery that reveals why the person diminishing you has been so desperate to keep you silent and small. At family dinner at my parents' house, when my husband Trevor had responded to something I'd said by announcing loudly, "You're nothing, your opinions don't matter, no one wants to hear from you." When his casual cruelty had landed in a room full of my family who'd shifted uncomfortably but hadn't immediately defended me, I'd felt the familiar shame and invisibility that had characterized much of our 6-year marriage. But then my sister Rachel had stood up from the table, had walked outside to the driveway where Trevor's car was parked, and had returned holding evidence that would expose exactly what Trevor had been hiding and would reveal that his need to call me nothing had been projection based on his own shame about secrets he'd been keeping while positioning himself as superior and in control. My name is Nicole Gardner, and I'm 33 years old. I'd been married to Trevor for 6 years when the family dinner incident exposed what he'd been hiding and revealed that his pattern of calling me worthless and diminishing me publicly had been covering his own insecurities and his own secrets about cross-dressing using my underwear while simultaneously treating me as if I had no value or worth. Trevor was 35, worked as account executive for advertising agency, was someone who presented himself as confident and successful, but who was apparently covering significant shame and fear about his own identity through projecting criticism and contempt onto me. The pattern of Trevor's treatment of me throughout our marriage had been relentless public diminishment. He'd regularly cut me off in conversations, would dismiss anything I said as stupid or irrelevant, would make comments in front of others about how lucky I was that he'd married me because no one else would want someone so ordinary and worthless. The cruelty had been consistent and had been delivered primarily in public settings, where defending myself would create scene, where witnesses would see me being diminished but often wouldn't intervene because challenging someone else's spouse felt inappropriate or uncomfortable. The family dinner at my parents' house had been gathering that included my parents, my sister Rachel and her husband, my brother and his wife, and Trevor and me. The conversation over dinner had turned to topic of local community issues, and I'd made thoughtful comment about recent city council decision that had affected our neighborhood. My contribution had been informed and relevant. I'd actually been following the issue closely and had information others at table didn't have. But Trevor had immediately cut me off with statement designed to humiliate me in front of my family. "You're nothing," he'd said loudly enough for everyone to hear. "Your opinions don't matter. No one wants to hear what you think about city politics or anything else. You barely understand how the world works. Just stop talking." The room had gone silent. My family members had looked shocked and uncomfortable. This wasn't first time they'd witnessed Trevor treating me cruelly, but this particular statement had been so blatant and so harsh that even people who'd been trying to avoid confronting Trevor's behavior couldn't pretend they hadn't heard it, or that it was an acceptable way to speak to your wife. I'd felt heat rise to my face, had felt familiar shame and desire to disappear that Trevor's public cruelty always created. No one had immediately defended me. My family members had seemed frozen by shock and by uncertainty about whether intervening in another couple's dynamic was appropriate, even when that dynamic involved obvious emotional abuse. But then Rachel had stood up from the table. She hadn't said anything immediately, had just pushed her chair back and had walked purposefully toward the front door. Everyone had watched her leave, confused about where she was going and what she was doing. And then she'd returned about 2 minutes later, holding something in her hand that she'd apparently retrieved from Trevor's car in the driveway. What Rachel had been holding was a pair of my underwear. Black lace panties I'd thought I'd lost weeks earlier. Panties she'd recognized as mine from years of being my sister and knowing what my belongings looked like. I went to Trevor's car to get my phone charger that I'd left there yesterday when he gave me ride, Rachel had said, her voice clear and controlled. And I found these in his center console. These are Nicole's underwear. I recognized them. So I'm wondering, Trevor, why you have Nicole's underwear in your car while you're sitting here calling her nothing and telling her no one wants to hear from her. The room had gone completely silent in a different way than before. This wasn't uncomfortable silence of witnessing cruelty. This was shocked silence of processing revelation that reframed everything. Rachel had walked back to the table and had placed my underwear where everyone could see them, physical evidence that Trevor had been taking my belongings and keeping them in his car for reasons that his panicked expression made clear were connected to secrets he'd been hiding. Trevor had tried to formulate response, had started to claim the underwear must have gotten into his car by accident, had attempted to suggest maybe I'd left them there somehow, but the explanations were obviously inadequate, and his panic was making clear this wasn't innocent situation, but rather exposure of something he'd been deliberately concealing. Those aren't there by accident, I'd said, finding my voice strengthened by Rachel's intervention and by the evidence in front of everyone. I've been noticing my underwear going missing for months. I thought I was losing them or misplacing them, but Trevor's been taking them. And based on his reaction, I think everyone here can guess why he's been taking my underwear and keeping them in his car while simultaneously calling me nothing and treating me like I'm worthless. The implication had been clear to everyone at the table. Trevor had been taking my underwear as part of cross-dressing or other behavior he'd been hiding, had been projecting his own shame about what he was doing onto me through public cruelty that positioned him as superior while making me the object of contempt, had been calling me nothing to cover his own insecurities about secrets he'd been keeping. Trevor had tried to leave, had attempted to exit the dinner rather than provide explanation, but my father had blocked his path and had said firmly that Trevor owed everyone at table, and especially owed me, honest explanation about what was happening and why my underwear was in his car. The confrontation that had followed, with my entire family present as witnesses, had involved Trevor finally admitting that he'd been cross-dressing using my underwear, that he'd been keeping items in his car so he could change in privacy of parking garages or restrooms, that he'd been hiding this throughout our marriage while simultaneously treating me with contempt and cruelty that he now claimed had been defense mechanism covering his own shame. "You've been calling me nothing for 6 years," I'd said to Trevor in front of my family who'd just witnessed both his cruelty and the exposure of his secret. "You've been treating me like I'm worthless and stupid and lucky that you married me. And the entire time, you've been taking my underwear and wearing them yourself while hiding it from everyone. Your cruelty has been projection. You've been making me feel small to cover your own shame about what you've been doing." The family had been supportive of me and confrontational toward Trevor in ways they hadn't been when they'd just witnessed his cruelty without understanding its context. My father had told Trevor that treating his wife the way he'd been treating me was unacceptable, regardless of what personal struggles he was dealing with. That projecting shame onto spouse through public humiliation was abusive behavior that wouldn't be tolerated in their family. Rachel had validated that she'd witnessed years of Trevor diminishing me, and that discovering his secret helped explain why he'd been so invested in making me feel worthless while he was hiding something he felt ashamed of. I'd left the dinner with Rachel that night rather than going home with Trevor, had needed space and support from my family to process what had been revealed and what it meant for my marriage. The relationship ended shortly after. While Trevor's cross-dressing itself might have been something we could have worked through, the 6 years of him publicly calling me worthless and diminishing me to cover his own shame created breach that was irreparable. 3 years after the family dinner where Trevor called me nothing and Rachel exposed his secret by pulling my underwear from his car, I'm 36 and living independently with rebuilt sense of self-worth that Trevor's years of cruelty had nearly destroyed. Trevor, from what I know through mutual acquaintances, has dealt with consequences of having both his cross-dressing and his abusive treatment of me exposed simultaneously in front of my family. His cruelty was recognized as projection. His confident superior image was revealed as covering shame and insecurity. His pattern of diminishing me was understood as defense mechanism rather than as accurate assessment of my worth. What I learned from being called nothing in front of my family followed immediately by discovery that exposed why Trevor had been so invested in diminishing me is that cruelty creates conditions for its own exposure, that people who are most desperate to make others feel worthless are often covering their own feelings of shame and inadequacy. That public humiliation can become catalyst for public revelation when someone brave enough steps forward with evidence that reframes the cruelty as projection. Rachel hadn't gone to Trevor's car looking for evidence of his secrets. She'd just been retrieving her phone charger and had accidentally found my underwear in his console. But her decision to bring that evidence back into the dinner, rather than ignoring it or addressing it privately, had transformed Trevor's moment of calling me nothing into moment of his own exposure, had given me and my family context for understanding that his cruelty had been about his own shame rather than about my actual worth. My name is Nicole Gardner. My husband called me nothing at family dinner, told everyone my opinions didn't matter, and no one wanted to hear from me. My sister went to his car to get her phone charger and found my underwear in his console, brought them back into dinner as evidence that exposed what Trevor had been hiding while treating me with contempt. His cruelty was revealed as projection, covering his shame about cross-dressing using my underwear. Public humiliation became catalyst for public revelation. For the first time after 6 years of his calling me worthless, Trevor had nothing to say because his secret was exposed, and his cruelty was revealed as being about his own shame rather than about my actual value. Cruelty creates conditions for its own exposure. People who diminish others most aggressively are often covering their own deepest insecurities. Thank you for reading. If this story helps you understand that cruelty creates conditions for its own exposure, please like and subscribe.